The steady rhythm of the heart monitor suddenly flatlined, its piercing cry echoing through the operating room. Dr. Sarah Chen's hands froze over Isabella Miller's open chest cavity, her eyes widening behind her surgical mask. "We're losing her." BP dropping rapidly, a nurse called out, her voice tight with urgency. "No pulse." Blood pooled beneath Isabella's lifeless body as the surgical team fought desperately to save her. The catastrophic car accident had left her with massive internal bleeding, multiple fractures, and severe head trauma. She had already coded once in the ambulance. Starting chest compressions, Dr. Chen announced, her skilled hands moving with practiced precision. "Push 1 of API." As the team worked frantically, something strange happened. The harsh fluorescent lights in the operating room seemed to dim, replaced by a soft, warm glow that appeared to emanate from Isabella herself. Several staff members paused for a fraction of a second, struck by the inexplicable phenomenon. "Come on, Isabella," Dr. Chen muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. "Think about your kids. They need their mother." 1 minute passed, 2. The monitor continued its mournful monotone. "Doctor," the anesthesiologist said gently, "it's been." "No," Dr. Chen interrupted. "One more round. Clear." As the defibrillator sent electricity coursing through Isabella's body, her back arching off the table, the strange light grew stronger. And in that moment, somewhere between life and death, Isabella Miller began her extraordinary journey, one that would test her faith, challenge her sanity, and change not only her life but the lives of everyone around her. The monitor beeped once, then again. If you found value in this story of faith and redemption, please subscribe to join our community of believers. Together we can share more inspiring stories of hope and divine grace. Life hadn't always been this hard for Isabella Miller. In her modest suburban home in Springfield, Illinois, there was a time when laughter echoed through the halls. But that was before cancer took Michael, her high school sweetheart and husband of 12 years, leaving her alone to raise their 2 children, Emma, a sensitive 10-year-old with her father's artistic soul, and 6-year-old Liam, whose boundless energy was a constant reminder of Michael. 3 years after Michael's death, the weight of his absence still hung heavy in every corner. Family photos told their story: their wedding day, Emma's first steps, Liam's birth, their last beach vacation moments frozen in time that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. As a middle school math teacher at Lincoln Middle School, Isabella barely made enough to keep them afloat. Medical debt from Michael's treatment loomed over them like a shadow. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle, though. It was watching Emma withdraw into herself, spending hours drawing the same scene over and over, a family of 4, whole and happy. It was answering Liam's innocent questions about where Daddy went and why he couldn't come back. Faith had once been Isabella's anchor, but after watching her husband waste away despite countless prayers, that faith had crumbled. At Lincoln Middle School, Isabella was known as the teacher who never gave up on her students. Even with her own struggles, she found purpose in helping young minds grasp complex equations and algebraic concepts. Her classroom was a safe haven, walls covered with colorful math posters and student artwork, a small collection of plants on the windowsill that Emma had helped her choose, and a corner shelf filled with books that went far beyond the standard curriculum. The financial reality of her situation meant every penny had to count. Her teacher's salary barely covered the basics, and the extra tutoring sessions she squeezed in between grading papers and making dinner only provided a small cushion. The bookstore job at Barnes Noble on weekends meant less time with her children, but the employee discount on books was a blessing. Emma devoured stories like air, and even Liam was starting to show interest in reading. Her daily routine was a carefully orchestrated dance of responsibilities. Up at 5:30 a.m. to prepare for the day, getting the kids ready for school, dropping them off at her elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house before heading to work. The kind woman had become like a grandmother to Emma and Liam, watching them after school until Isabella finished her tutoring sessions. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best she could manage. The other teachers noticed her exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her colleague Sarah Bennett, the school counselor, had started watching her with concern, making comments about stress levels and mental health that set Isabella's teeth on edge. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, couldn't risk anyone questioning her ability to care for her children. Parent-teacher conferences were the hardest. Sitting across from complete family's mother, father, child brought back memories that cut like knives. The way Michael used to attend every conference for Emma, his pride in their daughter's achievements lighting up his face. Now she sat alone on the parent side for her own children's conferences, fighting back tears when other teachers praised Emma's artistic talent, just like her father or Liam's natural charm. The nights were longest. After helping with homework, making dinner, handling bath time, and tucking the kids into bed, Isabella would sit at her kitchen table surrounded by papers to grade and bills to pay. The house creaked and settled around her, too quiet without Michael's laugh, his music, his presence. Sometimes she caught herself waiting to hear his key in the door, his footsteps on the stairs, before reality crashed back in. Her students' lives went on untouched by her private pain. They brought their teenage dramas and mathematical frustrations to her classroom, and she helped them navigate both with patience she sometimes couldn't find for herself. Teaching was her anchor, the one place where she felt competent, in control. Her students' successes became her own, their progress a reminder that growth was still possible even in the midst of loss. But lately something had been shifting. The exhaustion was becoming deeper, the loneliness more acute. She caught herself zoning out during lessons, lost in memories or worry. The numbers in her gradebook blurred together, and simple tasks seemed to require monumental effort. Even her colleagues had started to notice, exchanging whispers when they thought she couldn't hear. The breaking point felt close, hovering just beyond the horizon. Isabella knew she was running on empty, pushing herself beyond her limits, but she couldn't see any other way forward. Her children needed her to be strong, her students needed her to be present, and the bills needed to be paid. There was no room for weakness, no space for grief or doubt or the crushing weight of single parenthood. What she couldn't know was that the universe was about to intervene in a way that would shake the very foundations of her carefully constructed world. Sometimes she would later realize you have to completely fall apart before you can be put back together. And sometimes the light finds you exactly when you think you've lost your way in the darkness. The morning of October 15th began like any other. Isabella woke to her blaring alarm at 5:30 a.m., the autumn darkness still pressing against her bedroom windows. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, laying out clothes for the kids. Emma was already awake when Isabella checked on her, sketching in the dim light of her bedside lamp. Liam, as usual, required 3 attempts to get him out of bed. Breakfast was a rushed affair of toast and cereal, punctuated by Liam's endless chatter about his upcoming soccer game and Emma's quiet reminders about her art club meeting after school. Isabella nodded along, mentally calculating if she could afford the art supplies Emma's teacher had requested while simultaneously trying to remember if she'd graded all her students' math tests. "Mom, you're not listening," Emma said softly, her brown eyes so like Michael's, watching Isabella with that too-old understanding that broke her heart. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Just tired," Isabella forced a smile, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Tell me about your art project again." But before Emma could respond, the clock caught Isabella's eye. They were running late. Again. The morning dissolved into a flurry of activity, finding Liam's missing shoe, making sure Emma had her permission slip for the upcoming field trip, rushing everyone out to the car. The drive to Mrs. Patterson's house was tense with unspoken words. Isabella could feel Emma's disappointment, could see it in the way her daughter stared out the window, sketchbook clutched to her chest. Liam, oblivious to the tension, continued his soccer monologue from the back seat. After dropping the kids off, Isabella headed to school, her mind already racing ahead to the day's lessons. The autumn morning was beautiful, crisp air, leaves turning gold and crimson, sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. Later she would remember thinking how peaceful it all looked, how ordinary. She was waiting at a red light, adjusting her rearview mirror when she saw the truck. It was coming too fast, weaving slightly in its lane. In the split second before impact, time seemed to slow down. Isabella saw everything with crystal clarity: the driver's panicked face as he tried to brake, the coffee cup falling from her own hand, the flash of sunlight on chrome. The impact was devastating. The truck slammed into her car from behind with such force that she was thrown forward, then back, her head whipping against the headrest. The sound was incredible, screaming metal, shattering glass, the horrible crunch of the car's frame buckling under the impact. Her car spun wildly, careening across lanes of traffic. Everything happened both too fast and in slow motion. She felt each impact as her car pinballed between other vehicles, a sickening dance of metal and momentum. The airbag deployed with explosive force, stealing her breath. Pain bloomed everywhere at once, sharp and overwhelming. As her car finally came to rest, Isabella's thoughts weren't of herself. All she could see was Emma's face that morning, hurt and withdrawn, Liam's excited chatter about his soccer game, the paper she needed to grade, the bills she had to pay, her children who would take care of her children. She tried to move but couldn't. Something warm was trickling down her face. The world was starting to go dark around the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. She could hear people shouting, car doors slamming, someone calling out to her. But it all seemed very far away. "My kids," she tried to say, but no sound came out. "Please, my kids." The last thing Isabella saw before consciousness slipped away was a strange, soft light beginning to fill the car. It wasn't the harsh glare of emergency vehicles or the morning sun. It was something different, something peaceful. As darkness claimed her, she felt an overwhelming sense of warmth, of being embraced by something greater than herself. In the distance, sirens wailed. People gathered around the wreckage, horrified by the scale of the accident. Emergency responders worked frantically to extract her from the mangled remains of her car. But Isabella was already slipping away, crossing a threshold between this world and something else, something that would change everything. Her last conscious thought was a prayer not for herself, but for Emma and Liam. Please, she thought, not knowing who she was asking anymore, please take care of them. Then the light grew brighter, warmer, and Isabella Miller left the world of the living behind. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about life, death, and the power of faith. But in that moment, trapped in the wreckage of her car, Isabella had no way of knowing that this ending was really just the beginning. The light that enveloped Isabella wasn't harsh or blinding, it was gentle, like morning sunlight filtering through spring leaves. She felt weightless, free from the crushing pain of the accident, free from the weight of grief and responsibility that had become her constant companions. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. In this space between life and death, time seemed to lose all meaning. Isabella was aware of her body being worked on in the operating room below, could hear the urgent voices of doctors and nurses fighting to save her life, but it felt distant, like watching scenes from a movie she'd already seen. What captured her attention completely was the presence she felt growing stronger around her. Then he was there. The being she knew instantly was Jesus didn't appear as the stern figure from church paintings or the gentle shepherd of Sunday school lessons. His presence was something far more profound, pure love and understanding made manifest. When he looked at her, Isabella felt completely known, completely seen, in a way she hadn't experienced since Michael's death. "Isabella," he said, and his voice resonated through her very being. It carried the warmth of a parent's love, the strength of mountains, the peace of dawn breaking over still waters. "My child." Tears flowed freely down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. Years of doubt, anger, and loneliness seemed to melt away in his presence. "I stopped believing," she whispered, shame coloring her words. "After Michael, I couldn't." "I never stopped believing in you," he replied, and the love in his voice broke something open inside her. "Even when you turned away, I was there. Through every lonely night, every moment of despair, every tear you shed in silence, I was there." Images began to flow through her mind, moments she hadn't even realized were significant. The elderly woman who'd helped her carry groceries the day she'd felt too exhausted to go on. The student who'd left a hand-drawn card on her desk after noticing she seemed sad. Mrs. Patterson's steadfast presence in their lives. Small kindnesses that had kept her going, that had been, she now understood, God working through others to hold her up when she couldn't stand alone. "But my children," Isabella said, thinking of Emma's quiet withdrawal, Liam's innocent questions about his father. "They need me. They've already lost so much." "Trust in me," Jesus said, and his words carried a weight of promise that settled deep in her soul. "This is not the end of your story, Isabella. It is a new beginning." He showed her more visions then, not of apocalyptic destruction or global chaos, but of hope and redemption. She saw Emma blooming again, her art becoming a bridge to healing for others who had experienced loss. She saw Liam growing into a young man with his father's kindness and his mother's strength. She saw herself standing strong in her faith, helping others find their way back from the darkness of doubt and despair. There will be trials ahead, Jesus told her, his voice gentle but firm. Your faith will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. But remember this moment. Remember that you are never alone, that my love for you and your children is greater than any darkness you may face. Isabella felt truth of his words in every fiber of her being. The love she felt in his presence was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, deeper than romantic love, more nurturing than maternal love, more complete than any human connection could ever be. It was the love she'd been seeking all along, even when she'd claimed not to believe anymore. When you return, he said, share your story. Not everyone will believe you. Some will doubt, some will mock, some will try to silence you. But there are others who need to hear it, who are lost in the same darkness you were. Be a light for them, as I am a light for you. She wanted to stay in his presence forever, basking in that perfect love and understanding, but she could feel herself being pulled back, could hear the increasingly urgent voices of the medical team working to save her life. The light began to fade, but the warmth, the love, the absolute certainty of God's presence remained. Remember, Jesus said, his voice following her as she descended back toward her body, you are never alone. I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. The operating room came back into focus. She could feel the cold steel of the table beneath her, the desperate efforts of the medical team to restart her heart. But she was no longer afraid. The peace that passed all understanding, which she had heard about in countless sermons but never truly experienced, now filled every corner of her being. As life rushed back into her body in a surge of pain and sensation, Isabella held on to that peace, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with a faith renewed and a purpose restored. The real journey was just beginning. Isabella's return to consciousness was gradual, like swimming up through layers of warm water. The first thing she became aware of was the steady beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell of hospital air, and finally the dull throb of pain that seemed to emanate from every part of her body. She opened her eyes to find Emma curled up in a chair beside her bed, sketchbook open on her lap, pencil moving in swift, anxious strokes. Liam was asleep on a small couch nearby, his face peaceful in the dim light. For a moment Isabella just watched them, heart swelling with a love so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Mom," Emma's voice was barely a whisper. The pencil clattered to the floor as she leaped up, careful not to wake her brother. "Mom, you're awake." Before Isabella could respond, the room erupted into activity. Nurses rushed in, followed by Dr. Chen, whose exhausted face broke into a relieved smile. "Welcome back, Mrs. Miller. You gave us quite a scare." The next few hours were a blur of medical examinations, pain medications, and tearful reunions. Mrs. Patterson arrived with fresh clothes for the children and tears in her eyes. "God answered our prayers," she kept saying, squeezing Isabella's hand. "It's a miracle." But when Isabella tried to tell them about her experience, about the light, about Jesus, about the profound sense of peace and purpose she'd been given, she saw the subtle shifts in their expressions. The nurses exchanged glances. Dr. Chen made notes in her chart with a carefully neutral face. Even Mrs. Patterson's smile became fixed and uncertain. Only Emma seemed to truly listen, her eyes wide and serious. "I believe you, Mom," she said later when they were alone. "I felt something too while we were waiting, like someone was hugging us, keeping us safe." The first real challenge came when Dr. Bennett, the hospital psychiatrist, visited her room. He was kind but clinical, asking questions about her state of mind before the accident, about her grief over Michael, about her stress levels as a single mother. "Near-death experiences are fascinating phenomena," he said, pen poised over his notepad. "The mind can create incredibly vivid experiences under extreme stress, combined with the trauma of your loss and the pressure you've been under." "It wasn't a hallucination," Isabella interrupted, trying to keep her voice calm. "What I experienced was real. More real than anything I've ever known." Dr. Bennett smiled sympathetically. "Of course it felt real. But consider the context. You're a grieving widow, struggling to raise 2 children alone. It's natural to seek comfort in spiritual experiences." Isabella wanted to argue, to make him understand that this wasn't about seeking comfort. It was about truth, about a love so profound it had transformed her very being. but she could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. The news of her miracle recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Some nurses began stopping by just to talk, sharing their own stories of faith and unexplainable events. Others kept their distance, their professional demeanor tinged with skepticism. When her pastor visited, bringing prayers and casseroles from the congregation she'd abandoned years ago, Isabella thought he at least would understand. But as she described her encounter, she saw the same doubt creep into his expression. God works in mysterious ways, he said carefully, but we must be cautious about claiming direct divine intervention. Perhaps this experience is meant to be understood metaphorically. There was nothing metaphorical about it, Isabella insisted, frustration building. I met Jesus. He spoke to me. He showed me things about my life, about my purpose. The pastor patted her hand. You've been through a traumatic experience. Rest, pray, and give yourself time to process everything. The church is here to support you. But Isabella didn't need time to process. She knew with absolute certainty what had happened to her. The challenge would be helping others understand, especially when she returned to the world beyond these hospital walls. As she watched the sunset through her window that evening, Emma curled up beside her on the narrow bed. Isabella remembered Jesus' words, "Not everyone will believe you." She was beginning to understand just how true that warning was. Yet the peace he had given her remained, a steady flame in her heart that no amount of skepticism could extinguish. She might not be able to make everyone understand, but she knew what she had experienced was real. More than that, she knew she had been given a second chance for a reason. Looking down at Emma, who had fallen asleep with her sketchbook still clutched in her hands, Isabella silently renewed her commitment to the mission she'd been given. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever doubts others might have, she would share her story. Because somewhere out there someone else was lost in darkness, just as she had been, and maybe, just maybe, her story would help them find their way back to the light. The real test of her faith was just beginning. Isabella's return to Lincoln Middle School 3 weeks after the accident was met with a mixture of welcome banners, awkward smiles, and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the teacher's lounge. Her near-death experience had become the subject of intense speculation, fueled by her increasingly open discussions about her encounter with Jesus. Sarah Bennett, the school counselor, was the first to express professional concern. She caught Isabella after a staff meeting, her practiced sympathetic expression firmly in place. "We're all so glad you're back," she began, "but some of us are worried about you. Talking about religious visions, it might make some students and parents uncomfortable." "It's not a vision," Isabella replied calmly, though her heart was pounding. "It's what happened to me. I'm not pushing my beliefs on anyone, Sarah. I'm just being honest about my experience." Of course, Sarah nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But perhaps we should schedule some sessions to help you process everything. Trauma can manifest in unexpected ways." The suggestion of mandatory counseling was just the beginning. Principal Roberts called her into his office the following week, a thick folder on his desk. "We've received some complaints," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Parents concerned about religious influence in the classroom. Students claiming you've been distracted." "I teach math," Isabella responded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The only numbers I discuss are on the whiteboard. My personal experiences have nothing to do with algebra." Nevertheless, he pushed the folder toward her. "We need to document these concerns, and I'm requiring you to undergo a psychological evaluation to ensure you're fit for duty." The news spread through the school like wildfire. Colleagues who had brought her casseroles and get-well cards now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Parents requested their children be transferred to other classes. Even some of her most devoted students began to look at her differently. The final blow came from an unexpected source. During a parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's art teacher, expressed concerns about her daughter's recent drawings. "They're all religious imagery now," she explained, spreading out Emma's sketches. "Angels, divine light, scenes of heaven. It's concerning." "She's processing what happened to our family," Isabella defended, but her voice wavered as she looked at the drawings. Emma had captured the light exactly as Isabella had seen it, though she'd never described it in detail to her daughter. "Children are very susceptible to influence," Mrs. Rodriguez said carefully, "especially after trauma. We're worried about both Emma and Liam's emotional well-being." The implication was clear. Isabella's religious delusions were affecting her children. That night she found Emma crying in her room, surrounded by crumpled drawings. They said, "I shouldn't draw these anymore," she sobbed. They said it's not normal. "Oh, sweetheart," Isabella gathered her daughter in her arms, her own heart breaking. "There's nothing wrong with your art, or with what you believe." "Why don't they believe us, Mom? Why do they think you're crazy?" The question hit Isabella like a physical blow. She remembered Jesus' warning about the challenges ahead, but hadn't expected them to affect her children so directly. Sometimes, she said carefully, people are afraid of things they don't understand, but that doesn't make them less true. The opposition at school grew more overt. Anonymous notes appeared in her mailbox suggesting she seek psychiatric help. Parents began copying the principal on every email exchange, no matter how mundane. Sarah Bennett started dropping by her classroom regularly, clipboard in hand, taking notes on her behavior. Through it all, Isabella maintained her composure, drawing on the peace she'd found in that divine encounter. But at night, alone with her doubts, she questioned everything. Was she wrong to speak about her experience so openly? Should she have kept it private, safe from scrutiny and judgment? Then she would remember the love she'd felt in Jesus' presence, the certainty of her purpose, and her resolve would strengthen. She couldn't deny her truth, even if it cost her everything. One evening, grading papers at her desk long after the students had left, Isabella heard footsteps in the hallway. Looking up, she saw Sarah Bennett speaking quietly with Principal Roberts, both of them glancing in her direction with worried expressions. In that moment, she knew bigger challenges were coming. But as fear threatened to overwhelm her, she felt that familiar warmth in her heart, the peace that passed understanding. She wasn't alone in this fight. And somehow she knew this opposition was just part of a larger plan, one that would require all her faith and courage to see through. Emma's latest drawing lay on her desk, a figure standing alone in a storm, surrounded by light. Looking at it now, Isabella saw not just artistic talent, but prophecy. The storm was here, but so was the light. All she had to do was keep standing. The official letter from Lincoln Middle School arrived on a crisp November morning. Isabella's hands trembled as she read the carefully worded notice. She was being placed on administrative leave pending a formal evaluation of her mental and emotional fitness for duty. The letter cited multiple concerns from parents and staff and erratic behavior consistent with post-traumatic stress. Sarah Bennett had orchestrated it perfectly. Over the past month, she had compiled a thick dossier of incidents, Isabella mentioning her near-death experience to a grieving student who'd lost her grandmother, a lesson on probability where she'd used the concept of faith as an example. Prayers she'd been seen saying quietly at her desk during lunch breaks. The morning she cleaned out her classroom was surreal. Students watched through classroom windows as she packed her personal belongings into cardboard boxes. Some waved sadly, others quickly looked away when she noticed them. Her fellow teachers kept their distance, as if her supposed mental instability might be contagious. Only Mr. Thompson, the elderly physics teacher, dared to help her carry boxes to her car. "I've been teaching here for 40 years. He said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this witch hunt. Something about your story terrifies them, Isabella. Makes them question their own carefully constructed worldview." The news spread quickly through their small community. Parents she'd known for years crossed the street to avoid talking to her. The local newspaper ran a carefully worded article about concerns at Lincoln Middle School, not naming her directly but including enough details that everyone knew who it was about. The final humiliation came when she was asked to step down from leading Emma's Girl Scout troop. "We have to consider the comfort level of all parents," the troop coordinator explained, not meeting her eyes. "Some have expressed concerns about influences." Emma was devastated. "But you're the best leader we've ever had," she protested. "This isn't fair." Isabella held her daughter as she cried, fighting back her own tears. "Sometimes people let fear guide their actions instead of love," she explained. "But we have to respond with love anyway. That's what Jesus taught us." The isolation grew more profound each day. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings stopped coming. Emma's friends were suddenly too busy for playdates. Even Liam's soccer coach began watching her warily when she attended games, as if expecting her to start speaking in tongues on the sidelines. Sarah Bennett's campaign wasn't limited to the school. Isabella began hearing whispers that the counselor had been speaking to other parents, other teachers, even her neighbors, just looking out for the children's well-being, she would say, while systematically destroying Isabella's reputation and support system. The breaking point came when Isabella discovered that Sarah had contacted Child Protective Services. The social worker who showed up at her door was professional but firm. "We've received reports of concerning behavior," she explained. "Religious delusions affecting your ability to parent. Children being exposed to extreme beliefs." Isabella stood in her kitchen, surrounded by evidence of her ordinary life: Liam's homework on the fridge, Emma's art projects, a calendar filled with doctor appointments and soccer games, and felt the world tilting on its axis. "I'm a good mother," she said, her voice breaking. "My children are loved, safe, and well cared for." The social worker made notes, asked questions about Isabella's support system, now virtually non-existent thanks to Sarah, and examined the children's rooms. Emma sat rigid through her interview, answering questions with a maturity that broke Isabella's heart. Liam, confused and frightened, clung to his sister. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Isabella fell to her knees beside her bed. "Why," she whispered, tears flowing freely. "Why is this happening?" "I'm only telling the truth." In the silence that followed, she felt that familiar warmth, that peace that had sustained her since her encounter with Jesus. A memory surfaced: his words about trials and persecution, about standing firm in faith. She understood now what he had meant. The next morning, Isabella found Emma had slipped a drawing under her door during the night. It showed their family surrounded by darkness, but each figure was glowing with inner light. At the bottom, Emma had written in her careful handwriting, "They can't take away what's inside us." Looking at her daughter's artwork, Isabella felt a surge of determination. They could take her job, her reputation, her social standing, but they couldn't take away what she knew to be true. She had experienced something profound and real, something that had transformed her from the inside out. As she prepared breakfast, making pancakes in the shapes Liam loved, helping Emma pack her art supplies for school, Isabella began to form a plan. She wouldn't fight fire with fire. She wouldn't let Sarah Bennett's attacks turn her bitter or afraid. Instead, she would stand firm in her truth, respond with love to hatred, and trust that God had a purpose even in this persecution. What she didn't know yet was that her greatest trial and her greatest triumph still lay ahead. The custody battle began with a simple certified letter from Michael's parents. They hadn't been part of their grandchildren's lives since Michael's funeral, blaming Isabella for giving up on treatment too soon. Now, armed with Sarah Bennett's reports and the CPS investigation, they were petitioning for custody of Emma and Liam. The letter dropped from Isabella's trembling fingers as she processed their claims: emotional instability, religious extremism, inability to maintain employment, potential danger to the children's psychological well-being. They had hired Harrison Wells, the most expensive family law attorney in Springfield. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. Financial reality hit hard. Without her teaching salary, Isabella's savings were rapidly depleting. The tutoring clients had disappeared, warned away by whispered concerns about her mental state. The bookstore manager had regretfully reduced her hours, citing customer complaints. Even the modest life insurance policy from Michael was almost gone, eaten away by medical bills and daily expenses. The mortgage payment was already 2 weeks late when she met with Lisa Chin, the young legal aid attorney. "I'll be honest," Lisa said, reviewing the case files. "This isn't good. Sarah Bennett's report is damaging. The school's documentation, the CPS visit, the community testimonies, they're building a strong case that your religious experiences are manifestations of mental illness." "But they're not," Isabella protested. "Everything I saw, everything I experienced, it was real." Lisa's eyes were sympathetic but practical. "The court won't care about the theological truth of your experience. They'll care about stability, about the children's well-being. And right now, your in-laws can offer financial security, community standing, and what the court will see as a normal environment." The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, psychological evaluations, and character witnesses, most of whom now refused to testify on Isabella's behalf. Her former colleagues submitted statements expressing concern about her mental state. Neighbors spoke about strange behavior and religious obsession. Sarah Bennett's testimony was particularly devastating, painting a picture of a woman unraveled by grief and trauma. Emma and Liam were interviewed by court-appointed therapists. Emma, trying to defend her mother, only strengthened their case by talking about her drawings of heaven and angels. Liam, confused and frightened by the whole process, burst into tears and asked if they were being punished. The final blow came when Isabella received the foreclosure notice. Without income, with her credit destroyed by medical bills, there was no way to save the house. The same home where Michael had carried her over the threshold, where Emma had taken her first steps, where Liam had been brought home from the hospital, it would all be gone. That night, sitting in the darkness of her kitchen, Isabella faced her darkest hour. The walls seemed to close in around her as she confronted the possibility of losing everything: her home, her children, her dignity, her very sense of self. The faith that had sustained her felt distant, the peace she'd found in Jesus' presence like a fading dream. Emma found her there at dawn, still sitting at the kitchen table. Without a word, her daughter wrapped her arms around Isabella's shoulders. "Mom," she whispered, "remember what you told me about responding with love when people are afraid." Isabella pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "I remember, sweetheart." "Then we have to show them they're wrong. All of them. We have to show them what real faith looks like." From the mouth of her child came the wisdom Isabella needed. She had been fighting this battle all wrong, trying to defend herself, to prove her sanity, to maintain her dignity. But Jesus hadn't called her to defend herself, he had called her to be a light. The next morning, Isabella began packing up their home, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Each box was labeled with care, each memory wrapped carefully and stored. She called the real estate agent about listing the house before the foreclosure, spoke with apartment managers about short-term leases, applied for any job that might accept her. When Sarah Bennett drove past, slowing to watch Isabella pack her car, Isabella waved and smiled. When neighbors hurried past, she called out gentle greetings. When Emma reported that kids at school were calling her crazy daughter, Isabella taught her to respond with compassion for their ignorance. Through it all, she held on to the truth she had experienced in that divine encounter. The peace wasn't gone, it had just been buried under her fear and desperation. Now, as she surrendered her need to fight back, to defend herself, to prove anything to anyone, that peace began to resurface. But forces were already in motion that would change everything. In the darkness of her circumstances, a light was about to break through, one that would reveal the true nature of her persecution and the power of unwavering faith. The signs were there, but Isabella had been too overwhelmed by her own battles to see them clearly. Emma's withdrawal had deepened, her once vibrant artwork becoming darker, filled with shadows and lonely figures. She stopped eating lunch at school, claiming she wasn't hungry. Her teachers reported she was spending recess alone, sketching in her notebook instead of playing with other children. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon. Isabella had just finished another discouraging job interview when she received the call from Emma's school. Her daughter had been found in the girls' bathroom, crying uncontrollably, with a bottle of her grandmother's sleeping pills in her backpack. Isabella's world stopped spinning. Racing to the school, she found Emma in the nurse's office, pale and withdrawn, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The school counselor, not Sarah Bennett, thank God, spoke in gentle tones about depression, about the need for immediate intervention. "I just wanted it to stop," Emma whispered when they were alone. "The whispers, the looks, the way everyone treats us like we're broken or dangerous. I thought maybe if I was gone, they'd leave you and Liam alone." Isabella gathered her daughter in her arms, her own tears falling freely. "Listen to me, Emma Grace Miller. You are the most precious gift God has ever given me. Nothing is worth losing you. We'll get through this together, I promise." The psychiatric ward of Springfield Children's Hospital was a place of soft voices and muted colors. Emma's admission was a blur of paperwork, evaluations, and careful questions. The doctors were kind but firm. Emma needed intensive therapy, medication, and close monitoring. Her attempt might have been interrupted, but her intent had been clear. Isabella spent every allowed moment at the hospital watching her daughter through the window of the children's ward. Emma looked so small in her hospital pajamas, curled up in a chair with her sketchbook. The other children in the ward seemed to gravitate toward her, drawn perhaps by the same gentle spirit that Isabella had always cherished. The nights were the hardest. Returning home to Liam, trying to explain why his sister was away, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her heart was shattered in pieces. Mrs. Patterson helped with Liam, but Isabella could see the judgment in her eyes. Another failure, another sign that she wasn't coping. Emma's therapist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, became an unexpected ally. Unlike the others who had questioned Isabella's experience, she focused solely on helping Emma find her way back to light. "Your daughter's faith isn't the problem," she explained during a family session. "It's her fear of losing you, of watching you be persecuted, that's overwhelming her." The artwork Emma produced in therapy told the story her words couldn't. Page after page of darkness being pushed back by light, of figures standing strong against storms, of hands reaching down from heaven. Through her art, Emma was processing not just her own pain, but her mother's struggle as well. One evening, Isabella found Emma working on a new drawing. It showed their family, not just Emma, Liam and herself, but Michael too, and Jesus, all of them surrounded by that same divine light Isabella had experienced. "I remember what you told me about your experience," Emma said softly. "How it felt to be in his presence. That's how I want to feel again." The words broke something open in Isabella's heart. She had been so focused on defending her experience, on fighting the persecution, that she'd lost sight of its most important aspect, the love and peace she'd found in Jesus' presence. Her daughter's pain was a wake-up call. They needed more than just survival, they needed healing. That night, Isabella made a decision. The custody battle, the lost job, the foreclosed home, none of it mattered compared to her children's well-being. She would stop fighting, stop trying to prove herself to others. Instead, she would focus on rebuilding what truly mattered, her family's faith, hope, and love. But as Isabella was learning, God's plans often worked in unexpected ways. Emma's crisis, devastating as it was, would become the catalyst for changes no one could have anticipated. Sometimes she realized you had to reach the very bottom before you could see the path back to light. The next morning, as she signed the paperwork for Emma's treatment plan, Isabella felt that familiar warmth in her heart. This time, though, it came with a new understanding. The trial she faced wasn't just about her anymore, it was about her entire family's journey toward healing and redemption. The day of the custody hearing dawned cold and gray. Isabella sat alone on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, watching Michael's parents confer with their expensive lawyer. They hadn't even looked at her when they arrived, their faces set in masks of righteous concern. Just as the bailiff called their case, a tall man in an immaculate suit strode through the courthouse doors. "Mrs. Miller," he asked, approaching her bench. "I'm James Warner from Warner Associates. I'd like to represent you if you'll have me." Isabella stared at him in confusion. "I have a legal aid attorney who's doing her best with limited resources," he smiled kindly. "But you need someone who can match Harrison Wells dollar for dollar. Someone who knows how to fight these battles." "I can't afford." "Pro bono," he interrupted. "Let's just say I have a personal interest in cases where faith meets family law." Inside the courtroom, the difference was immediately apparent. When Harrison Wells presented Sarah Bennett's testimony about Isabella's religious delusions, James Warner was ready with expert witnesses, respected psychiatrists who testified about the documented phenomenon of near-death experiences and their positive psychological impacts. When Michael's parents' lawyer brought up Isabella's financial instability, Warner produced evidence of 3 job offers, including one from a prestigious private school that had been withdrawn after Sarah Bennett's interference. He then presented documentation of Bennett's systematic campaign to destroy Isabella's reputation and livelihood. "Your Honor," Warner addressed the court, his voice resonant with conviction, "what we're seeing here isn't concern for these children's welfare. It's religious discrimination. Pure and simple. Mrs. Miller experienced something profound during her near-death experience. Whether we believe in such experiences or not is irrelevant. What matters is that this experience made her a stronger, more devoted mother, not a weaker one." Emma's testimony, carefully prepared by Warner, was powerful in its simplicity. She spoke of her mother's unwavering love, of the peace she'd found in faith, of how her recent crisis had been triggered not by her mother's beliefs but by watching her mother being persecuted for them. Then came Warner's masterstroke. He called Sarah Bennett to the stand and, through careful questioning, revealed the personal vendetta behind her campaign. It emerged that Bennett's own husband had left her years ago after a religious awakening, leading to her deep-seated prejudice against expressions of religious faith. M.S. Bennett Warner asked, his tone gentle but firm, "Isn't it true that you began targeting Mrs. Miller not because of any legitimate concerns, but because her experience triggered your own unresolved trauma?" Sarah Bennett's composed facade cracked. Her testimony devolved into a bitter diatribe against religious fanatics that did more to reveal her own biases than damage Isabella's credibility. The judge, a stern woman with penetrating eyes, listened to all testimony without expression. When the final arguments were made, she took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. "This court," she began, "is not in the business of evaluating the validity of religious experiences. We are here to determine what serves the best interests of these children, having reviewed all evidence and testimony. I find no compelling reason to separate them from a mother who has consistently demonstrated love, dedication, and strength of character in the face of extraordinary challenges." The custody petition was dismissed. Michael's parents left the courtroom without a word. Sarah Bennett sat frozen in her seat, face pale with shock. Outside the courthouse, Isabella turned to James Warner. "Why did you help us? Really?" He was quiet for a moment, looking up at the clearing sky. 15 years ago, I had my own near-death experience during a car accident. I met Jesus just like you did. When I tried to tell people, I lost friends, clients, nearly lost my family, until I learned that some truths aren't meant to be proven, they're meant to be lived." As they walked down the courthouse steps, Emma and Liam running ahead, Warner added, "This isn't over, you know. Winning the legal battle was just the first step. You've been given a platform now, a chance to show people what true faith looks like in action." Isabella watched her children playing in the weak winter sunlight, their laughter echoing across the courthouse square. The peace she'd found in Jesus' presence filled her heart once again. "I'm ready," she said. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." She didn't know then that her story was about to reach far beyond their small town, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. The trial that had been meant to break her would instead become a testimony to the power of unwavering faith and unconditional love. Despite the legal victory, the financial devastation of the past months couldn't be undone. The foreclosure notice on Isabella's house became final, giving them 30 days to vacate. The medical bills from Emma's psychiatric treatment, combined with the months without income, had completely depleted their savings. Even with James Warner's help defending against the custody battle, their situation was dire. Packing up their home was like dismantling their life piece by piece. Each room held memories of Michael, of their life together, of the family they had been. Emma stood in her bedroom, touching the walls where her artwork had hung, while Liam asked repeatedly if they could take his entire collection of superhero action figures to their new home, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. The day they moved out, Isabella found herself alone in the master bedroom one last time. The afternoon light slanted through the windows just as it had on her wedding day, when she and Michael had snuck away from their reception for a quiet moment together. She could almost hear his laugh, feel his arms around her, see his face bright with love and promise. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Michael or to God. The warmth that had sustained her since her near-death experience felt distant, muted by exhaustion and despair. The apartment was a stark downgrade from their home. The walls were thin, the carpet worn, the neighbors' arguments clearly audible through the shared walls. Emma and Liam had to share a bedroom, their belongings crammed into a space half the size of their old rooms. Most of their furniture had to be sold or stored, leaving the apartment feeling bare and temporary. Emma's depression, though improving with treatment, was still fragile. The move hit her particularly hard. "This isn't home," she said quietly their first night in the apartment, curled up on her new twin bed. "It will never be home." Isabella found herself working 3 jobs: morning shifts at a local diner, afternoon receptionist work at a dental office, and evening custodial work at a nearby church. The hours were brutal, leaving her little time with her children. Mrs. Patterson still helped when she could, but the distance to their new apartment made it difficult. One rainy evening, exhausted from her shifts and dreading the long bus ride home, they'd had to sell one of their cars. Isabella found herself at rock bottom. Standing at the bus stop, soaked to the skin, she watched through the window of an upscale restaurant as families dined together warm and dry. She saw Sarah Bennett among them, celebrating something with colleagues, all of them laughing and comfortable. The contrast between their lives, Sarah's comfortable success and her own desperate struggle, hit Isabella like a physical blow. For the first time since her encounter with Jesus, she felt truly abandoned. The peace that had sustained her seemed to wash away with the rain. When she finally made it home, she found Emma and Liam had tried to make dinner themselves. The kitchen was a mess. There was burned mac and cheese stuck to her only good pot, and both children were on the verge of tears. "We wanted to help," Emma explained, her voice trembling. We thought if you didn't have to worry about dinner." Isabella looked at her children's faces, saw the love and worry in their eyes, and something inside her broke. She sank to the kitchen floor, shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. Emma and Liam came to her immediately, wrapping their arms around her, creating a circle of warmth in their cold, sparse kitchen. "I'm sorry," she whispered, holding them close. "I'm so sorry for all of this." "It's not your fault, Mom," Emma said firmly. "None of this is your fault." But in the darkness of that moment, Isabella wasn't so sure anymore. Had her insistence on sharing her experience, on standing firm in her faith, cost her children their stability, their happiness, their chance at a normal life? The question haunted her as she lay awake that night, listening to her children breathe in the next room, wondering if she had failed them all. The final indignity came in the form of an official letter from Emma's psychiatrist. Due to missed payments, they would need to discontinue her treatment unless arrangements could be made. Isabella stared at the letter, her hands shaking. The payment plan she'd carefully worked out was already stretching their budget to the breaking point. There was nothing left to cut, no more corners to trim. That same evening, Liam came home from school with a fever. The pharmacy wouldn't fill his prescription because their insurance had lapsed, another casualty of Isabella's job loss. She found herself standing in the fluorescent-lit aisle, counting out change from her tip jar, still coming up short. "Ma, the pharmacist said gently, we have some samples in the back. Let me see what I can do." The kindness of strangers had become both a blessing and a humiliation. The church where she worked as a custodian quietly left groceries by her cleaning cart. Her children's teachers found extra supplies they didn't need. Even the bus driver on her evening route would sometimes wait an extra minute when he saw her running from her last job. But pride had no place in survival. Isabella learned to accept help with grace, even as each act of charity reminded her of how far they had fallen. The woman who had once hosted PTA meetings and organized fundraisers was now collecting food bank boxes and applying for emergency assistance. The apartment's heating system failed during a cold snap, leaving them huddled together under blankets, sharing body heat. Emma's art supplies dwindled to stubby pencils and scraps of paper. Liam wore shoes a size too small because there wasn't money for new ones. Every day brought new challenges, new choices between necessities. One morning, Isabella found Emma trying to sell her artwork on the street corner near the bus stop. "I thought maybe if I could help with money," her daughter explained, shivering in her too thin coat, "maybe things would get better." That night, after the children were asleep, Isabella sat at their scratched kitchen table and did the math one more time. Even working 3 jobs, even with all the assistance they could get, they were sinking deeper into debt each month. The medical bills alone would take years to pay off. She thought about Michael's life insurance policy, now completely depleted, about the college funds they'd started for the kids, sacrificed to keep a roof over their heads, about all the dreams and plans they'd had for their family, now lying in ruins around them. The breaking point came when Liam asked innocently at breakfast, "Mom, are we poor now?" "Tommy at school said we're poor." His lower lip trembled as he added, "He said it's because you're crazy and nobody wants to hire crazy people." Isabella excused herself to the bathroom, turned on the shower to mask her sobs, and cried until she had no tears left. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, gaunt, exhausted, decades older than her years. Where was the divine purpose in this? Where was the meaning in watching her children suffer? That evening, a pipe burst in their apartment, flooding the kitchen with dirty water. As Isabella stood ankle-deep in the mess, watching their few remaining possessions soak up the contaminated water, something inside her snapped. The peace she'd found in Jesus' presence, the certainty of her purpose, the strength of her faith, it all seemed like a distant dream. Why, she whispered into the empty air, why show me heaven only to abandon me in hell? Why give me a message of hope if I can't even take care of my own children? Only silence answered. The warmth that had sustained her since her near-death experience felt cold and distant. For the first time since that divine encounter, Isabella found herself questioning everything. Had it all been real? Or had Sarah Bennett been right? Was she just a grieving widow who'd created a comforting delusion? As she mopped up the flood water with their last clean towels, Isabella faced the darkest truth of all. She was running out of strength to keep fighting. Something had to change, or they weren't going to survive much longer. What she didn't know was that change was already coming, but not in any way she could have expected. The revelation began with a thumb drive anonymously left in James Warner's office mailbox. As he reviewed its contents late one evening, his face grew increasingly grave. The files contained emails, private messages, and documents that painted a disturbing picture of conspiracy and deliberate persecution. Sarah Bennett's campaign against Isabella hadn't been random. The emails revealed a calculated plan, coordinated with Principal Roberts and Michael's parents, to have Isabella declared mentally unfit. Their motivation wasn't concern for the children, it was money. Michael's life insurance policy hadn't been depleted, it had been illegally diverted by his parents with the help of their financial advisor, who happened to be Sarah Bennett's brother. The evidence was damning. Private messages showed Sarah Bennett coaching witnesses to exaggerate their concerns about Isabella's mental state. Emails between Principal Roberts and Michael's parents discussed how to frame Isabella's religious experience as a psychological breakdown. There were even communications with local business owners, pressuring them not to hire Isabella. Warner immediately brought the evidence to Judge Martinez, who had presided over the custody case. The judge's reaction was swift and severe. She ordered an immediate investigation and froze the disputed insurance funds. The story broke in the local newspaper. Conspiracy uncovered, teacher's life destroyed for financial gain. The article detailed how Sarah Bennett, driven by both personal bias and financial incentive, had orchestrated a systematic campaign to destroy Isabella Miller's life. The community's reaction was immediate and intense. People who had shunned Isabella now approached her with tears and apologies. Parents who had demanded their children be removed from her class wrote letters of support. The truth about how she had been targeted and persecuted spread quickly through their small town. Emma's art teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, came to their apartment personally to apologize. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, crying as she hugged Emma, "but I was afraid to speak up. I let fear silence my conscience, and I'll never forgive myself for that." The most stunning revelation came from Sarah Bennett's assistant, who finally found the courage to come forward. She revealed how Sarah had deliberately targeted Isabella after hearing about her near-death experience, seeing an opportunity to exploit Michael's parents' grief and greed. She said no one would believe a grieving widow claiming to have met Jesus, the assistant testified. She knew exactly how to make a person look unstable, how to isolate them, how to break them down piece by piece. Local news cameras captured Sarah Bennett being escorted from her office, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. Principal Roberts resigned before he could be fired. Michael's parents faced criminal charges for their role in the insurance fraud. Isabella watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. The truth had come to light, just as Jesus had promised it would. But the revelation brought no joy, only a deep sadness for the darkness that had driven people to such cruelty. One evening, as she watched Emma drawing her artwork now filled with light again, Isabella remembered Jesus' words about responding to persecution with love. The truth had vindicated her, but it had also revealed how much healing their community needed. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from her sketchbook, "do you think Sarah Bennett and Grandma and Grandpa will go to jail?" Isabella sat beside her daughter, studying the drawing. It showed a group of people standing in darkness, with light reaching down to touch them. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know that they need prayers more than punishment." The warmth she had felt in Jesus' presence returned stronger than ever. along with a clear understanding of what she needed to do next. The truth hadn't been revealed for revenge, but for redemption, not just hers, but perhaps for those who had persecuted her as well. As reporters gathered outside their apartment building seeking interviews and statements, Isabella knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their story. The truth had come to light, but what mattered most was what they would do with it. The transformation of Springfield began with a simple act of forgiveness. When reporters asked Isabella if she would press charges against her persecutors, she shocked everyone by saying, "I pray for Sarah Bennett and Michael's parents. They acted out of pain and fear, just as I once did when I lost my faith after Michael's death. They need healing, not punishment." Her words sparked a conversation that spread far beyond their small town. News outlets picked up the story of the woman who responded to persecution with compassion, who met hatred with love. People were drawn not just to the scandal, but to the example of grace under pressure. The first surprise came from Harrison Wells, the lawyer who had represented Michael's parents. He arrived at Isabella's apartment unannounced, his usual polished demeanor cracked with emotion. "I had no idea about the insurance fraud," he said. "But I knew something wasn't right, and I stayed silent. I'd like to make amends by handling your civil settlement pro bono." The recovery of the diverted insurance money meant Isabella could pay off Emma's medical bills and move her family into a proper home. But more meaningful than the financial restoration was the community's change of heart. Mrs. Rodriguez organized an art show featuring Emma's work titled Light in Darkness. The exhibition drew hundreds of visitors, many of whom were moved to tears by Emma's visual journey through their family's trials. The local newspaper ran a feature about how art had helped a young girl process trauma and find healing. Liam's soccer coach, who had once watched Isabella warily from the sidelines, approached her at a game. "My wife had a near-death experience years ago," he confessed. "We never told anyone because we were afraid of exactly what happened to you. Your courage in speaking your truth has given us the strength to share ours." Even some of Sarah Bennett's former allies began to come forward with their own stories of how she had manipulated and pressured them. The web of fear and control she had woven through the community began to unravel, replaced by a new spirit of openness and acceptance. The private school that had withdrawn their job offer reached out again, this time with a unique proposition. They wanted Isabella to help develop a curriculum that addressed spiritual experiences and faith alongside traditional subjects. "Children need to learn that there's room for both reason and wonder in the world," the headmaster explained. One Sunday morning, Isabella found herself standing in front of her old church congregation. Many faces showed shame or regret for how they had treated her family. "I'm not here to condemn anyone," she began. "I'm here to share what I learned through our trials. Faith isn't just about believing in miracles, it's about showing love when facing hatred, choosing forgiveness when given every reason for revenge." Her words resonated beyond the church walls. People began stopping by their new home, sharing their own stories of struggles with faith, doubt, and redemption. Emma's art room became a gathering place for others who had felt isolated or misunderstood. The most powerful moment came when Sarah Bennett's teenage daughter appeared at their door. "My mom's in therapy now," she said hesitantly. "She talked about how losing my dad to religion made her bitter. She asked if you would be willing to meet with her." Isabella's response, immediate and genuine acceptance, demonstrated the truth she had been living. Love truly could overcome fear. Forgiveness could break cycles of hurt, and light could penetrate even the deepest darkness. As spring returned to Springfield, the transformation was visible throughout the town. Where there had been whispers and closed doors, there were now open conversations and extended hands. The community that had nearly been torn apart by fear and suspicion was being knit back together, stronger for having faced its shadows. Isabella watched it all unfold with a deep sense of peace, understanding now why Jesus had shown her that the truth would prevail. It wasn't just about vindication, it was about transformation, about showing how faith could light the way through darkness, not just for one family, but for an entire community. 1 year after the truth came to light, Isabella stood in the courtyard of Hope Academy, watching students file into the new spiritual wellness center that had been named in her honor. The building, with its walls of windows and Emma's artwork prominently displayed, represented everything their journey had taught them about faith, healing, and community. The transformation in her family was profound. Emma, now thriving in therapy and art classes, had become a beacon for other children struggling with depression and anxiety. Her artwork, once dark with despair, now radiated hope and healing. She had started a youth art therapy program helping other kids process their own struggles through creative expression. Liam had grown too, his natural enthusiasm returning as their lives stabilized. He no longer asked if they were poor, instead proudly telling anyone who would listen about his mom's special experience and how faith had saved their family. His soccer team had made it to the state championships, with Isabella cheering from the sidelines alongside other parents who had become true friends. Sarah Bennett's journey toward redemption had been perhaps the most surprising development. After months of therapy and genuine soul-searching, she had become an advocate for religious tolerance and mental health awareness. Her public apology to Isabella had opened the door for real healing in the community. The private school where Isabella now taught had become a model for integrating spiritual and emotional wellness into education. Students learned about different faith experiences alongside their regular subjects, creating an environment of acceptance and understanding. Parents who had once demanded Isabella's removal from their children's lives now sought her guidance in helping their families navigate questions of faith and doubt. The foundation Isabella established with the settlement money helped other families facing similar persecution. They provided legal assistance, counseling, and support groups for those whose faith experiences had made them targets of discrimination. James Warner served on the board, bringing his legal expertise and personal understanding to their mission. Michael's parents, facing the consequences of their actions, had begun their own journey of healing. Though their relationship with Isabella and the children remained complicated, small steps toward reconciliation had begun. They had written letters from prison, expressing genuine remorse and asking for forgiveness. Isabella's near-death experience and subsequent trials had become more than just her personal testimony. They had sparked a movement of openness and acceptance in their community. The local church had started hosting interfaith dialogues, creating space for people to share their spiritual experiences without fear of judgment. Standing in the courtyard that spring morning, watching the sun play through the stained glass windows Emma had designed, Isabella felt the familiar warmth of divine presence. The peace she had found in her encounter with Jesus had never truly left her. It had simply been waiting for her to understand its deeper purpose. She was no longer the broken widow struggling to keep her family together, nor the persecuted teacher fighting to defend her truth. She had become something more, a living testament to the power of unwavering faith and unconditional love. The dedication ceremony for the Miller Center for Faith and Healing drew hundreds of people from across the country. Families who had faced similar persecution shared their stories, each one a testament to the power of standing firm in faith despite opposition. Isabella took the podium, looking out over the gathered crowd. Among them sat Emma and Liam, their faces bright with pride. Sarah Bennett was there too, sitting quietly in the back, a living reminder that transformation was possible for anyone. Even Michael's parents had been granted permission to attend, their presence a symbol of ongoing reconciliation. When I first shared my experience of meeting Jesus, Isabella began, I thought the story was about me, my encounter, my trials, my vindication, but standing here today I understand that it was never just my story. It's a story about all of us, about the light that can shine through our darkest moments if we're brave enough to let it. She gestured to the walls where Emma's artwork hung, depicting scenes of struggle, redemption, and hope. My daughter once asked me why people were afraid of our faith. Now she helps others find their own path to healing through art. My son wondered if we were being punished. Now he understands that what looked like punishment was actually preparation for purpose. The center would serve as more than just a memorial to their journey. It would provide counseling for families in crisis, legal support for those facing discrimination, and a safe space for people to share their spiritual experiences without fear of judgment. The curriculum Isabella had developed would be shared with schools nationwide. Our greatest trials, she continued, often reveal our greatest purpose. When I was at my lowest point, living in that cramped apartment, working 3 jobs and barely keeping my family together, I questioned everything I believed. But that was exactly where I needed to be to understand the true meaning of faith. Not just believing in miracles, but trusting in love's power to overcome fear, hatred, and doubt. Tears flowed freely among the audience as Isabella concluded, this center stands as a testament not to my story, but to all of our stories. To everyone who has ever felt alone in their faith, questioned in their beliefs, or persecuted for their truth. You are not alone. Your experience matters. Your faith matters. And your light, no matter how dim it might seem, has the power to illuminate the path for others. As she stepped down from the podium, Emma ran to embrace her, followed quickly by Liam. The three of them stood together, surrounded by the love of their community, their journey from persecution to purpose complete. The warm presence Isabella had first felt in her near-death experience filled the room, touching everyone gathered there. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that every trial, every tear, every moment of doubt had led them exactly where they needed to be, not just to heal themselves, but to help heal others. The light that had guided them through their darkest hours would now shine as a beacon of hope for generations to come. Dear friends, if this story of faith, resilience, and redemption has touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and reflections could help others facing similar struggles. Subscribe to our channel to support our team's mission of sharing more inspiring stories of hope and divine grace. Help us spread the message by sharing this video with your loved ones. Every like, comment, and share means the world to us and helps these important stories reach those who need them most. Together we can bring light to others through the power of storytelling.